There's a lot of talk these days about all the various issues that we're having in society, issues in politics, issues in the economy, issues with declining birth rates, issues with mental health. And we'd like to talk about these issues, and they talk about these issues in media and in the news. But I think there's a larger underlying issue that no one talks about, that it's almost controversial to talk about. It's almost as if people are afraid to talk about it. But to me, it seems like this is the one larger issue at the bottom of many of the other issues. I don't want to say all, I don't want to say most, but maybe it is. And it's the lack of love. I think we've really lost a lot of our capacity and ability and understanding of love in society. At least in the West, at least in maybe other parts of the established world. And I think that there's many lenses through which you can look at love: familial love, self-love. But I want to look at it through the lens of relationships, because I think that's where most of it stems back for all of us, because we all grow up. We're all supposed to have parents, if we're lucky, who model love for us and teach us what love is and give love to us so that we have some sort of understanding of that. So as we move forward in the world, we're able to give it to other people and accept it as well, because accepting it is sometimes harder than giving it. And I think when you look at most of the dating advice that's out there, most of the gurus who talk about love and how to find love, I think they're approaching it from a place of fear. Because a lot of the advice that they give is it's much more centered around respect and self-protection than it is about love. What do they tell you? They tell you, don't be the first to call. Don't write back too many times in a row before the other person replies. Date multiple people at once so you don't get too attached to anyone. Don't open up about your feelings too soon, because then you give away your power. They talk about making sure that things are transactionally even in one way or another. And that if a man doesn't do this, then cut him off. And if a woman doesn't do this, then cut her off. And it's a lot of talk about boundaries. And I think that some of these things are helpful for people to learn. I think that understanding boundaries is good. Understanding how to set boundaries, having boundaries to protect yourself and to have self-respect is important. But I think that what we choose to talk about when we talk about love points a lot of light, shines a lot of light on what it is that we're really focusing on, what it is that maybe we really want but are too afraid to say. And I think many people want safety more than love. They want some form of safety because love can be very vulnerable. It can poke at the defenses that you've built up over a lifetime to feel safe. And I know for myself, growing up, I don't remember my parents modeling a lot of real unconditional, vulnerable love. And I think I'm not saying this as a criticism to them. I'm saying this because I think this has become the norm, at least in the West, at least in America, where parents will sooner give things to their children monetarily than they will in terms of themselves. Like, I think many parents these days will give their kid a gift or a toy before they give them a piece of themselves. And I remember growing up, it was very much like that, where we would be given something, we'd be given a toy or a game or, whatever type of stuff the kids want at the time. But my parents wouldn't really open up about things that were truly vulnerable, about mistakes, about things they wish they had learned sooner, about the parts of themselves that they hadn't quite really come to terms with. And I think that that's one of the ways in which you make your kids become accepting of who they are and of their mistakes and of their shortcomings, because you're honest about your own with them. And I think that that's something that is far too difficult for many parents to do, and then the kids don't learn how to do it, and then they are unable to do it in a relationship. And when I think about my relationships earlier in life, if you had asked me at the time, I would have definitely said that I was looking for love and that I wanted love in a relationship and that I wanted true love. Maybe I was swayed by the Disney movies. I don't know, but I would have definitely said that I was open to it and that I wanted it and that's what I was looking for. But when I go back and I look at my behavior and I look at the types of relationships I chose to have and the types of people I chose to partner with, it wasn't always about love. Sometimes it was about finding someone who was interested in me just enough that I could say, this person cares, this person is respectful, but they don't care about me so much that they push me into the vulnerable territory in which I need to face parts of myself that I'm not ready for. And they were probably doing the same thing with me, right? I think that's very often what happens in relationships is that people find someone else or partner with someone else who's ready for what they're ready for. Not all the time, right? There's imbalances. But I think very often that's what happens is we get attracted to people who have the same kind of walls up as we have. And if true love had presented it to me, if someone who was really interested had presented themselves to me when I was younger, I think I would have ran so far away from it. I think it would have been so scary because I wasn't accustomed to that growing up. I don't think some people are. Some people have a lot of good love modeled for them in their families. And that's great. If that's you, congratulations, count your blessings, because I don't think that's most people. And I can only speak from my own personal experience, so I don't know what that's like. Maybe that's wonderful. But I know for myself, I think part of what's helping me have more hope for a better relationship in the future is the self-examination, the self-acceptance, and the honesty with myself. The honesty that, yeah, I said that I wanted love, but I was not acting that way. I was not choosing people who were also available for that. I was just choosing what was safe. And I think that's what's happening with many relationships. I think that people listen to the advice that's out there, the advice that's about safety and protection and boundaries and respect. And when they get that in a relationship, they think, okay, well, this checks all the boxes that they tell me to check. So then this must be love, right? Because some people talk about vulnerability in love. Some dating coaches do, but I don't hear people talk about that as much as I do about boundaries. And I think it's one of the reasons why people are so unfulfilled is because they have a relationship with someone. And when they compare their relationship to all the standards that society today shows us for relationships, it checks those boxes. Because much of society doesn't talk about the deeper things. Much of society, many dating coaches, many people who say that they're talking about love, don't actually talk about love. They talk about how to protect yourself in transactional situations, essentially. There's all this advice, and to me it seems like it's made to manufacture some sort of scarcity for yourself. And if it works at all, really what you're doing is playing some sort of psychological game in which you use someone's most basic human instincts in terms of acquiring things that they think are rare. And you're essentially using that against them. And that's not love, that's strategy. And I think that people have to get honest with themselves, you know. It's not easy. It's not easy to get honest with yourself. But if you think you want love, and then you only act out of fear and self-protection and strategy, then maybe you'll get a partner. Maybe you'll get what they would say is like a high-value partner, whatever that means. But that's probably not going to lead to love. Something drastic would have to happen along the way, I think, for that kind of behavior to transition into love. And I'm sure it happens. I'm sure it happens. I just don't think it happens in the majority of those relationships. A lot of the transactional relationships that we see today, I think that's what has men and women on some level so against each other more than ever before, or at a level now that's higher than it's been in the past. I think it's from being taught love transactionally and then having that done to you, but also not realizing that you're kind of also doing it to the other person as well. And I had a previous video where I talked about dating and I talked about love and I talked about how people often use relationships to kind of level up in their life, level up their social status, their financial status, all of these things. And I think at the time I wasn't thinking about it deep enough. I think I was thinking that people are doing it because they're shallow. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that I don't think people are as shallow as we assume they are. I think people show a very shallow version of themselves. But I think it's because they're just not comfortable showing the more nuanced, the more vulnerable part of themselves because they don't know how. They don't know how. They don't even realize they're doing it. They think that they're doing everything that they should be doing. They see that what's said to be a good couple is a couple who gives each other nice gifts on the holidays and gets dressed up nicely for a nice birthday dinner, and then you post it on social media, and on social media this couple looks amazing and everyone says, I want their life, I want to have that, they're having this great life together, they're eating at restaurants, they're going shopping, they're going to shows, they're doing all these amazing things. And very often when you know those couples personally, you realize they're not really that happy. They're just good at taking pictures and going to nice restaurants. And for some people that's enough. You know, maybe some people aren't ready to dig deeper into what it takes to have a real vulnerable, unconditionally loving experience with someone. I think what we get wrong about love is that people often see it as this naive thing, that love can save the world, that love can fix things. But I think love is the ultimate form of medicine. It's one of the few things that gets through to your soul, that will let you start to accept yourself. And how many people's problems are really just about not accepting themselves? If you have love in your life, like if you have someone who really loves you, really believes in you, you start believing in yourself. Even when you thought there were certain things you couldn't believe in yourself in, you'll start. They'll convince you. Like unconditional love will convince you of those things. And deeper love will heal the wounds that you didn't know you had, the wounds that you have from childhood, the gaps that you have in yourself that keep you from doing the things that you want to do. Love can solve that. And I think that when you have love on a personal level, it's easier to have love for yourself. And I think in much of what they teach you in therapy, in much of what happens between a therapist and a client, is about learning self-love. And so we recognize in that setting that love is healing. Yet we don't talk about it on a larger level, about how individually, if we can all work more towards love, we can have more love in society. And if we start to realize that there's a lot of work that goes into love, there's a lot of self-work that goes into love, I don't think that it's easy to pursue love and to give love and to receive love. Sometimes receiving love is harder than giving love. I don't think it's easy to do that if you didn't have it modeled for you at a very young age. And I think, unfortunately, most people probably don't have it modeled for them at that young age. So you almost have to teach it to yourself. You kind of have to unlearn all of the defenses that you've built up over time, all of the defenses that society even teaches you and encourages, the defenses that say, if you have this sort of public-facing relationship, if you can check off these boxes, then you're okay. You don't have to think much deeper. And I think there's such a danger in that. There's so many relationships, I think, where people are just playing this game of, you give me this and I'll give you that. And we could both pretend that we have what we want. We can both play this game that we're in a loving relationship and that this is as deep as we want it to be, when really part of that agreement, part of that transaction, is that neither of you ask for anything more. Neither of you ask for any real acceptance because you're happy with, Instagram relationship. When you have love in your life, I think that even global politics would be a little bit easier. Because if everyone, or at least the majority of people, knew love, knew how to experience love, knew, embodied, felt, understood real love for another person, then it would be very hard to go to war and bomb innocent people and do all of these things that make the world at large a much more dangerous place. Because you'd think about the people who live in that location. You'd think about the families that they have. I read a quote that says, if you truly love someone, if you truly love one person, that it's impossible to not love everyone else. And I know that's a bit out there. It's a bit far out there for love. But I think on some level it's true. I think that once you unlock some sort of love in yourself and in relationships and with other people, it starts to spill out into so many other aspects of your life. I think that has more of a ripple effect than solving any of these individual issues. Like there's a birth rate crisis. Well, if we solve that birth rate crisis and there's a bunch of kids that are born, but nobody's loving these kids, what's going to be the impact of that? That's probably going to be worse than if we just had less people. So I think way too often in society, we try to solve an issue based off of the symptoms rather than the cause. And I think a lack of love is a cause of so many of society's shortcomings these days. So I just challenge you to think more about what it is that you really want and the way in which you're manifesting that, the way in which you're going after that, the way in which you're acting in relationships. If you want a relationship, if you want love, if you want what true love is, which is acceptance, which is giving, which is vulnerability, which is taking the risk, which is putting yourself out there and not knowing whether or not it's going to work, opening yourself up to rejection, right? If you're playing this game where you're just dating a million people all the time, you're never open enough for love. You're never settled enough with one person to actually open up with them about who you really are. The thing to do is start getting really honest with yourself about love. If you say you want love, if you're out there, if you're trying to date, think about what parts of you you're hiding. What parts of you do you not show when you're in relationships? Because that's where the shadow lies. That's where the darkness lies. That's the thing that's going to get you. That's the thing that's going to kick you back into having a very transactional relationship versus having a real loving relationship. Because if you can't face those things on your own, if you can't face them on your own, you're not going to be able to easily face them in a relationship. And some things you can face together once you have that initial foundation of love between two people. But I think that if you never stop to think about it, and I think many people don't, I think that then it's much harder to face it when it happens. It's much harder to even realize that it's happening. So think about that. Think about what you really want. And if you really want love, think about how you've been avoiding it and how you could start to change that. And I think it'll show up not only in your personal lives, but I think the world would be at a better place if we all did that. I know, it's silly. It's silly to say maybe. It's too hopeful. It's too Pollyannish. I think about Jesus and John Lennon and all of the famous people who've talked about love over the years, and they weren't treated so kindly in the end. So I think as a society we have some sort of an aversion to love. But I think, as the Beatles said, love is the answer. So thank you for watching this, and I hope to see you in the next video.